Can you see me, Denise? Hi.
Yes, I can see you. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Hannah, for the introduction, and thank you to Mirna and the Sonic Acts team for putting together an amazing biennial. It's a real feast for the senses. We're going to talk about a film we made in 2022 called Soot Breath, Corpus Infinitum. It is our third film, but the second film in a series we call Elemental Cinema. And each film in that series takes a classical element as its guiding thing for inspiration, something to follow, something to think with, something to think through. Soot Breath, Corpus Infinitum takes up the element of earth as its element. And today is a Virgo full moon, and this is important in some of the research. Virgo is an earth sign, and Denise's moon and my sun sign. The initial question, or sort of the initial topics that we were interested in is a question of reimagining subjectivity, intersubjectivity, how to go beyond intersubjectivity, especially because of all of the ways in which the definitions of subjectivity, the use of subjectivity, have led to long, long histories of violence. And our question, or the way we began this project, was to think about reimagining subjectivity, but not only reimagining it, also looking at the ways in which different configurations of human subjectivity have led to regimes of violence.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I wish I could be there with all of you. As Arjuna was saying, we started with the question, or one could say questioning of subjectivity, but not so much looking from the perspective of integration, but actually thinking from the perspective of what, let me call it disintegration, but not so much disintegration, but disintegration as a reference to violence. And of course, we had so many different ways that we could, take as a point of departure and then follow with this, but because the film's element is earth, obviously, so we could not but start with the body. And starting with this image of the body that we have as something, that occupies space, as something solid, as something with limits, as something which offers resistance, as obviously the common image of the body. I was following the previous panel, so, all of that is also part of reference to our beginning with the body, and it's actually interesting that we follow that amazing conversation. But anyway, so we started with the image of the body, solid and separate, as something that is crucial to the ways in which violence prevails under global capital and in the history of capital for so many centuries. And we go from that image then to to another one. So the idea of corpus infinitum, right? This infinite body, which is an image which is still about something that has we understand or we take as a body, but a body without borders, a body without boundaries. It's an image for that which exists, but and is material. We are not, corpus infinitum does not refer to something immaterial, something that is material but unlimited. So, so the film meditates on, the body as a solid and on this image of Corpus Infinitum. And in doing so, what we try to do is to invite, as we speculate on a different kind of sensibility, a sensibility that it's different than the one that we cultivate now in so many ways, precisely with this image of the body as a solid, as something that occupies space, as something that has limits, as something that, as something that it's separate, bodies as separate things. And we speculate then on separability, on the many ways in which limit is plotted in our minds. It's not something that is in the things out there, but it's already in our minds. And also connected to that, obviously, the notion that places, populations, persons, that we are, bounded, enclosed, unified, which is obviously what, as we know, also supports this image of otherness, of authority, right? The view that which is outside, that which on the other side of that line, of that limit, that is dangerous and as such undeserving of care, attention, protection, and even worse.
I think this sense of the body's limits goes back to Renaissance moments where there was a analog of the body politic and the physical body, and the way this is kind of a pre-literate society, and the way people understood politics was through metaphors and analogies with the body. So the boundaries, the borders, the limits of our physical body have always been twins at the level of nation states, at the level of political governments. The other title, Soot Breath, approximates Corpus Infinitum, but through phase transition. We were in Death Valley, heading south, and we looked up what the phase transition from gas to solid, air to solid is. And the technical term is deposition, and the example it gave was soot breath. Oh, it was soot. And breath, of course, is the transformation of solid into air. So positioning the human in this kind of cycle, or not a cycle, but in this kind of flow between phase transitions was another way to approximate a unbordered, unbounded body. The borders and boundaries, this idea of separation, from going from human subjectivity, going from the human to the political, we see in its most horrific sense currently in Gaza. We see this kind of, well, for the film which we deal with, the US-Mexico wall, one of the walls that we were considering visiting and filming was the wall around Gaza. This was back in 2022. And we wanted to continue the kind of analog between the body's limits and the national limits, and look at the ways in which violence at the border is enacted. We didn't film in Palestine, partly because I'm not allowed to go to Israel, but it's a different story. But we see the regimes of violence that form around walls, that use enclosure, that use lines of separation, being enacted at its most horrific, at its most violent, at its most deadly in the past few months, or past 5 months. It's not new, it's in a long history of violence, but it is, for me at least, at its most urgent to keep talking about it, as the last session mentioned, and to also keep thinking about it and understanding it in historical context and historical philosophical traditions.
We in For Waters, Deep Implicancy, we used lethal abstraction to refer to knowledge that leads to the creation and building of the atomic bombs. And lethal abstraction was an image to which we return in Soot Breath, Corpus Infinitum. But now, considering how it operates in separating people, right, and creating in the plotting, in that plotted thing in our mind, which separates people, and then at the same time justifies support without ever necessarily being articulated, supports the building of ways of walls, and also the policing and military apparatus that's designed to keep at bay those fleeing the ecological devastations and wars of global capital, and shows these I think in its last two films, right? But I think also in Serpent Rain, it's part of that. It's not so much that we are, bringing the elements as some kind of replacement to abstraction, and it's not that we believe that it's possible to make do without abstraction, but what we're really highlighting is the ways in which these certain kind of abstraction that sometimes is given explicitly, but usually is there implicit, how it's so much tied to violence. And that is exactly the opposite to what we are made believe. We assume that abstraction will somehow protect us precisely because it's moving away from the body. But what we find more and more is the lethality of the kind of abstraction that has governed our existence for quite some time now.
And this abstraction we trace back to this moment of, or one of the formative moments of geometric abstraction that we describe as lethal abstraction, is when Plato applied the Platonic solids, the pyramid, the cube, to the elements. And it's this kind of wielding of the line, of the circle, of symmetry that has been applied to the body, that applies to politics. You can think of, it applies to things like identification. You can think of Israel's ethno-nationalist ambitions as predicated on a kind of symmetry. All ethno-nationalist ambitions are predicated on a kind of symmetry of identification, of seeing yourself and only yourself, not seeing beyond that kind of symmetry. You get it in fascist architecture, and you get it in the censorship of counter-discourses. You get it currently in Germany, where the silencing of Palestinian discourse is, based on the principle of symmetry. There's only one way to understand things. Denise, do you want to add anything else, or should we play the clip?
We can play the clip, yes, we can move.
We're going to play a 6-minute excerpt from the film. We could play that.
I mean, the wall separates and it's vertical, but we can also think in terms of the circle that encloses and then creates the notion of totality. So if still thinking with these mathematical images, you have the points, the lines, the planes, and the circles. And all three operate at the level of thinking, kind of like intra-structures of thinking, right? Because they are plotted into what's being described without necessarily be made explicit, until one tries to answer the question of how is it that persons can think of themselves both as members, as individual points, and then at the same time as members of a collective.
Symmetry, crystal symmetry, is a way to say, I know how to control you. I know how to dominate.
We are agents of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. If you cross the wall, you will be in violation of U.S. federal immigration law.
The 20th century was a dictatorship of the crystal symmetry. The order of the universe actually was, Kepler proposed this. It was wrong, but it was proposed that actually the order of the whole universe was based on the Platonic solids.
When you look at the wall, now you have the figure of the person looking at the wall and immediately making the distinction between what's enclosed in the space that gives unity and identity and what's outside of that enclosure, which is the other, which is dangerous, which is unknown. But if touch the wall, I will immediately feel what is also on the other side of the wall, because heat transfer is taking place between my hand, the wall, and everything else that is there on either side of the wall. And touching is when the human sense that actually more immediately gives this experience. And that experience is given without reflection. You just feel it. You feel something is hot. You feel something is cold. But when you feel something as hot or cold, you are also feeling everything else around it, because everything is exchanging internal kinetic energy with everything else in the universe.
Can we bring the lights and Denise back, please? I think we'll...
Am I back? Oh, I'm back.
Yes, you're back. I think let's talk about heat in a second. I think just to expand a bit on the Platonic solids that you saw in the four corners, the images of Google Earth maps. Someone made a video of the US-Mexico wall, and it follows the whole, it crosses the whole continent of North America, and in the four corners you see the Platonic solids, and this was Plato ascribed them to the four elements, and then Kepler revived this explanation for the world as based on geometric abstraction. It's interesting from the talk before, talking about the science of the eye and optics. It was Kepler who developed a very early version of the camera and then applied that to his understanding of the eye. And it was that was one of the formative moments where knowledge, camera, and the eye become collapsed into each other. And it is an example of the kind of way in which geometric abstraction or lens-based abstraction starts to overdetermine the body. Should I say more about lethal abstraction, about the crystal, before we...
Yeah, I thought before we move, because we are moving to something else.
Yeah. So you also see the crystal overlaid, and this is, and you also hear a crystallogist talking about the dictatorship of symmetry. The crystal arguably is the first moment of accumulation. It was found across early hominids, collected and accumulated. It is also one of the only naturally occurring objects which has straight lines and symmetry. So this kind of moment of the formative moment in prehistory of accumulation, of gathering, hoarding, and not sharing, and geometric abstraction is really condensed in the crystal, when in fact the crystalline form is in total abundance. It's in our flesh, it's in our skin, it reflects light, it refracts light. It's not something to be necessarily accumulated. That's going backwards. Going forward from Plato and Kepler and the crystal, you find this form in the Archimedes solids, in the detonation device of the hydrogen bombs. You probably saw it in Oppenheimer. It's this kind of football-shaped explosive device in the middle of the bomb, which creates an implosion and an explosion. So the kind of we sort of trace a very broad lineage from the crystal to mass violence of the atomic weapons, and that's a kind of brief overview of our idea of lethal abstraction.
And in Soot Breath, we, as I said earlier at the beginning, the invitation is one of, I think both. On the one hand, of attending to the connection between lethal abstractions, or between this kind of abstraction and violence, and on the other hand, the moving, the invitation to image infinity, right? To image without separability, to approach existence without separability. So yeah, of course, the film we'll see it, and the film may be about so many things that Arjuna and I didn't think about, and we'll never know, because how you come to it. But what we are trying to do then is to really make that invitation to image infinity as much, as strongly as possible, precisely because of the ways in which whenever you want to convey something, you want to convey an idea, and if you want to do it using images, the expectation is that things will be discrete, right? You have to keep ideas separate or you have to break down an idea into discrete parts if you want it to be understandable. And that, of course, it goes for the images, but also for as you're writing, for discourse. So in the film, we try then to image infinity, actually to image that in separation, by getting as close as possible towards a vantage point that in which you cannot distinguish between human, non-human, human more than human, or between or among the things that are present. But it's not an attempt to get close so as to know better, like as in the previous conversation, right? These scans that supposedly shows us so much more about ourselves, but actually, the movement towards closeness is a gesture that approximates touch. So one that foregrounds texture over rupture, over separation, intimacy over enmity, and implicancy over separability.
I think what helped us think through and image these kind of not quite alternatives, but otherwise, thinking of these aspects of subjectivity as otherwise, was a kind of looking at the different landscapes and looking at the European landscapes, looking at, say, where Kant spent most of his life in the Baltic Sea, and came up with ideas of the sublime where there actually is very little danger in the landscape. We played around with this idea of what would happen if Kant was put in the jungle, and what kind of notions of danger in the landscape. But not only danger, but like, it's hard, I don't know what the word is. If you spend some time in the jungle, it's so full, it's so swollen, it's so there's so much life and death and richness, but there's also a very limited amount of perspective. You can't see very far. It's too dense. So this kind of sublime, which is predicated on a very flat landscape and a very safe landscape, sort of falters in the jungle. And so we were thinking quite a lot about the jungle or the swamp in the US context, the jungle in the Amazonian context, and what kinds of subjectivity or epistemologies, cosmologies might emerge, and not just the jungle, but also the kind of music and culture. So the blues was very important in the making of this film, and that is a music that comes from the swamps around the Yazoo Delta, around the Mississippi, which we heard a little bit about yesterday. Should we play the next clip? Yeah. The film itself, it starts and ends in the jungle, and as if that's the kind of asking the question of what if that was the seat of modern knowledge as opposed to the European landscape or the European context. And then we play the beginning is like 2 minutes, and then the last minute of the film.
There was so much distortion involved in those relationships that I don't trust that the master class could then form what you would call an intimate and loving relations with other white people, their children, their wives. It seems to me the slave relations was twisted universally. In other words, wherever slavery touched down, I do not believe that it is then easy to talk about love relations.
you feel something is hot, you feel something is cold. But when you feel something as hot or cold, you are also feeling everything else around it, because everything is exchanging internal kinetic energy with everything else.
That's how it begins. And this is like the Spark notes of the film. I'm going to play the... that's where it begins, and then it ends in the same jungle. And I think...
Oh, Lord. Lord, if I ever get back home, I never do wrong. Well, if I can just make it home, I won't do wrong no more. Lord, I won't do wrong no more. Lord, I left me willing to baby in the courthouse crying, Daddy, please don't go. Lord, I'll be back home. Well, Lord, I'll be home one day for long. Oh, just wait for me.
Can we bring the lights up? Thank you.
I go.
Yeah.
So what becomes more evident at the end as we return to the rainforest is the ways in which we have been describing the film as this invitation. So at the end, we have this suggestion, this wondering about what I think we could call material figuring of the first person singular and the first person plural. And the image, the figure we have, I should say, in that is echo. Echo, is standing for, referring to reverberation. The sound that returns, and the sense that one does not need to separate origin and destination, for instance. So, and that for us is a figure for that other sensibility, one that differs profoundly from the ego image that prevails in the era of neoliberal capital, right? The subject of psychoanalysis and phenomenology. So echo resonates like notes across the planet into its quantic entrails, and also as phonemes out in the cosmic vastness, in the infinitum.
Earlier in the film, there's a moment where Denise talks about the myth of Narcissus, and we didn't play that clip, but I think the role of echo as a model. We also the role of heat as something that is not intersubjective but crosses organic and inorganic matter. And the film is dedicated to tenderness, which is not an emotion, but like a physical state that you find both in humans and in non-humans. It's a kind of a swelling, a swollenness that you also find in the jungle, in the rainforest. Should we open to questions?
I think we should open. Yeah.
No? Or did you want to say something?
No, it's good. That was a nice way of ending with tenderness.
Would anyone like to ask a question? Yeah.
Hi, I have one question, and you might mention it and I missed it. What is with the fifth element of Platonic solids and the fifth solid and the fifth element? Because there are 5 of them, no? And ether being the fifth element.
Yes, the fifth one is ether or the universe. I think it has different names. We stayed with the 4 classic elements because they are the ones that, I mean, it's not there is no causality, but we stayed with them as they are the ones that are common and repeat in different modes of thinking in which are informed by the elements. That's primarily the reason we didn't want to get into also discussions as to how many are there and then whether there is such a thing as ether or whether the universe itself should be represented as an element. But I do think that, the fifth element actually starts another different conversation about, for instance, about the ways in which, it opens up to, how do I say that? Because it opens up to questions of oneness, for instance. That is, so if the fifth element, if it is the universe, so it already gives you some kind of oneness. And then if you think of a oneness as one more element, one more figure for representation, then, it might lead to all kinds of conversations about how Western philosophy has developed from Plato. But for us, what was interesting was to keep, to keep going back to that which repeats in all different, known modes of thinking and then make reference to them without reducing them, without saying, oh, by the way, it's all the same. So the elements stand for, for something that it's common, but it's not the same, or doesn't even require that to have that conversation.
It's also in Chinese astrology, you have wood and metal, and it depends which. There are many elemental systems.
Yeah.
There's also the periodic table. And we don't exclude them, but at least for this project, we're working now on the 4th one, on the element of fire. Yeah.
Is there anyone else? I can see this one just over here.
Thank you. I think I just have to think how to formulate this. I think I want to ask you something about something that always interests me about your films is the material, like I'm thinking with this idea of disintegration and the coming close, the closeness, the proximity and texture and tactility as a means of moving in a different direction than rupture and separation. And I think I'm just really curious about, always think about you and your collaboration and all of the things that are present in the film but are kind of not present in terms of like pieces of material that we could decode through some sort of like analysis, like material or symbolic analysis. And I think like Arjuna alluded to it a wee bit with this idea of like not being able to go to Israel, but the not being able to go to Israel to film the wall, the Gaza wall, is also part of this film. And so it's something, yeah. So I think I'd just love to hear you speak a bit about the pieces that are here but are here in a different way.
Thanks, Kana. I think especially in this film, we try very hard to get away from vision, or get away from the centrality of vision in a kind of hierarchy of senses. Many Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers called it the most noble sense. And so this film really tries to work in under the skin, inside the resonant cavities, as Margarita was mentioning yesterday, below the, audible, the sub-bass you heard here very presently. So there's a kind of at the threshold of the senses. That works. I think you have to see more of the film, or you probably got a little bit of a sense of it, but it works in a non-discursive, non-linguistic, paracentral, periacoustic way, which I think is what, not being able to go to Israel is a kind of, my experience of that deportation was deeply embodied, deeply in my flesh. And so when we edit the film, that emerges in the kind of paracentral.
Yeah. Thank you for the comment question. So something else that is and it's not in the film, but it's very much crucial to it is the collapse of the iron ore dam in Brazil, in Brumadinho, in 2019. Beginning of 2019, I was watching, the news on TV. I was in Vancouver, and I, it was something that affected me in ways that, maybe because I was watching it. My parents were in Vancouver, so we were watching Brazilian TV. So I was following it as it was happening, and then it was something that happens all the time. And so then I just had that feeling that was, I could have written about it, but when I talked with Arjuna next, said, okay, our next film, we got to do it on the element of earth. And we have to go to Brumadinho. I don't know what we're going to do, but we have to go there because this feeling it needs something. And it was anger, it was revolt, it was tiredness of, 300 people were killed in a number of trees and livestock and fish. And they almost killed the river that appears in the film. They had killed, the same company killed the river 2 years before, the Rio Doce, and now Paraopeba was also under the risk of being killed. So yeah, I think, as Arjuna was saying, that lots of emotions come through, are in there, and they are in response to the very things that we cover, right? And I think in our cases also, it is about sensibility, isn't it? At the end of the day. It is about all the things that we know already, that we see over and over again, people being killed over and over again, and how we can respond, how we do respond to it, and then about the limits of the usual ways we have to responding to it, which to me requires that that we rethink how we go about explaining and understanding why something like the massacre in Gaza happens, and as we watch it, and why that's happening, and we are being forced, coerced not to say anything and to do anything about it. So it is both what we can say and also that which we can't say, not even because of prohibition, but just because it's can't be articulated. Yeah.
I think that speculative space, as much as we're documenting and visiting sites of violence and disaster, there is this deep investment in the kind of speculative reimaginings, and we think of Gaza as an absolute failure of human rights, both on the legal side, but also on this question of what the human is, what the genre of human, and what constitutes a human, what is excluded from that category. And I think we spend a lot of time reimagining not just the human, but like the human subjectivity, its sensibilities, and that leads to, trying to reimagine a kind of cinema, what kind of cinema might be embodied not in the sense of camera movement, which is the classic way of making embodied cinema, but thinking about the way red light is the spectrum of light that enters the body. And so a truly embodied cinema would just be kind of red light, and that would be absorbed through the protein crystals. Or what kind of film grain, if released from the celluloid, what if soot was a type of film grain which has almost zero luminance? What kind of cinema would be made with soot as its film grain? So these are some of the questions that move from the critical analysis to the speculative space, which kind of maybe goes in the sometimes imperceptible or in the infrastructural space of thinking and being and feeling.
Hey, maybe I wanted just to make a provocation that continues what we're speaking about, and which could relate also the elemental to the ether and to this kind of paravisions or parafictions of the metabolic, which is when I see your films on and on, I have a feeling that there's a relation with spectrality, with ghosts and with hauntings that comes. And when I see also your diagrams, I do feel that there's a space beyond the images that is conjured somewhere in this kind of hallucinatory spectral space. So I wanted to get you to speak a little bit about hauntings and ghosts.
So the film that follows this is currently up in Vienna. It's called Ancestral Clouds, Ancestral Claims. It's at Kunsthalle Vienna until, I think, the end of March. And this is a ghost story. And it really deals with haunting and ancestrality and ghosts as a ghost story form. Yeah. Which is a cop-out of the question, but go to Vienna, I don't know, but maybe Denise will.
I have also an indirect comment or a reaction to the question. I think the spectral, the ghostly, is something that we share, as Arjuna said at the beginning. My Virgo moon and his Virgo sun makes us so square, so analytical, so much invested in a particular kind of thinking, right? The very kind of, in a way, the very kind of thinking that the films comment on and are kind of like against is something that we that would, on the one hand, if you following astrology, right? On the one hand, describe the kind of person Arjuna sees him as saying, as being, and how I go about feeling with my Virgo moon. But I think, of course, this square, this analytical, cold, abstract kind of thinking, it has its consequences, right? It doesn't, it doesn't get rid of everything else. I think to the opposite. I think there is a lot of that which is excluded or not capturable or reduced by this mode of thinking. It's there haunting it, and I think somehow we get these the films allow us to, let it out. I think this is, maybe it's something about the double identity of it. The films just bring it all out. And in the case of Soot Breath, actually, is the one that we had that is more the Virgo of all the films is Soot Breath, because we had it so planned and mapped, and we knew exactly how we want to follow the ideas and to present them. And yet, I think in the process, the access is coming through, and then I think that access, that which exceeds the analytical, is what makes the films how they are.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Arjuna and Denise, and thank you for the really insightful questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.